It is the afternoon of November the 8th, Election Day 2022, and we had a storm come in here yesterday, and it's brought lots of wind and lots of rain, probably the biggest storm we've had in the past 2 years. And this is the first time we've really gotten to test out the lot drainage, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. So why do you need to be careful about this guy you're going to hire to do the excavation and trenching work on this new house you're going to build? Well, this is the first house I ever built, and I wanted to be active in the construction of it. I did the preliminary design work, and I wanted to hire all the contractors and oversee the job, and then toward the end do some of the finish work myself, because I've done some rehab work on other properties before. But who would I hire? Well, there was a guy who did the preparation work for the synthetic grass installation at my old house, which is located about a quarter mile from here. There he took out the existing grass and then took the soil level down 6 inches and refilled it back up with a certain combination of sand and gravel, and then had to recontour the lot to make the flat parts perfectly flat and to give a nice curvature to the small portion of hillside there. I didn't know anyone else who did that kind of work, so I hired him to work on this house. His name is Greg Thornhill. I originally thought he would be here for just 3 or 4 jobs. Well, he ended up being here for 9 jobs. He was on the site working here at least 30 days, and it could have been more than 60 days. I didn't keep count, but he was obviously here more times than any of the other contractors, which is why you really need to be careful about choosing the guy who does your tractor work. He was actually here for the very last job, which was putting down the driveway. And then he actually started with the very first job, which was the preliminary grading. And we'll take a look here at some of the equipment Greg used. The most used piece of equipment on this job was the excavator, which dug all the holes and trenches. The second most used piece of equipment was the skip loader, which has a bucket on the front, but it was mostly used for its scraper on the back, which cleaned up the trenches and holes once they were filled up. And then during the final grading, it sculpted the lot and got everything level. Greg owns 2 excavators and he owns 2 skip loaders, and he was able to leave them here a good part of the time, so it wasn't really a problem for him to come in, because we usually have the right piece of equipment here on site, even though he was working elsewhere as well. Next most used pieces of equipment were here for just 1 job, but it was a big job. There are 2 structures here, one the 3,400 square foot main house, and then a 1,100 square foot shop building. Under each structure we had to dig down 5 feet and then refill that hole in 8-inch layers with soil that was of just the right compaction and the right moisture content. And that was required by the city and the soil engineer. We certainly wouldn't have done that ourselves. The last piece of equipment is actually the smallest and was used only on the last job, and that was compacting the driveway. and that was the only machine that we had to rent. Greg owned all of the other pieces of equipment. After preliminary grading, it was time to get under construction with the house and put in the foundation and the framing. I wanted one contractor to do both of those jobs because I figured however good a job the foundation contractor did, that the framing contractor would be griping about that foundation if it wasn't one he put in. So I, at the recommendation of a neighbor, hired John Greppen Construction Company. And boy, did that ever turn out to be a great way to start the actual building of the project. I was very curious, and John Greppen took all the time in the world to teach me about what they were doing, and really learned a lot from John Greppen. Greg's next job was digging the two 80-foot long leach lines down at the bottom pad. Each of these was 7 feet in depth, and they had to be filled up partially with rock, and then the leach lines laid in there, and then rock on top of that, and then a permeable fabric, and then soil on top of that, and compacted and flattened out. Next, we went back up to the upper level where Greg dug an 8-foot deep hole for the septic tank. He put sand in the bottom of the hole so that the septic tank would have a nice even surface to sit on, and along with that he had to dig 3 2-foot deep trenches from the house and the shop building to accommodate the waste lines. You might be wondering how we got a waste line from the septic tank down to the leach field below. The soil engineer said that the upper pad didn't percolate well enough, and that the only place we had to put the leach field was down there. And we were able to get a company by the name of Ventura Directional Drilling to come in and do sort of an S-shaped hole in the ground. They're actually drilling not in a straight line. They brought in a 160 feet long piece of tubing and brought it up through the hole after they were done drilling down there. They came out at just the right spot for us. They were pretty much miracle workers on this job. Another trenching job was from the street to the house and shop building, a distance of about 260 feet. For the installation of the gas and water lines, this had to be 3 feet deep and inspected by everybody. Then the trench filled. Greg's next trench was for the underground electrical line from a nearby pole to the main panel of the house. That was about a 100-foot distance and needed to be taken down 4 feet. Utility pole was down below the house grade, so it required trenching along that steep slope. Installing the drainage field seemed like sort of an annoying and unnecessary job, especially here in California where we don't get much rain. But when you see that rainstorm we had at the beginning of this video, you can understand the importance. This was actually one of the biggest jobs of the whole home building project. We laid about 500 feet of underground pipe. That all had to be trenched. We installed 8 catch basins that not only caught water from the surface area, but each catch basin was hooked up to the closest rain downspout from the roof gutter system. And this all terminated in a pit down at the lower part of the upper pad, and then we had to get Ventura Drilling back in here to drain from there down to the irrigation ditch at the lower pad. The 9th and final job of this construction project was to install the decomposed granite driveway. There was 100 tons of decomposed granite that had to be spread around and then compacted. The decomposed granite has a binder in it, or sort of a glue, and that helps the particles stick together and make sort of a solid surface out of this driveway. At the beginning of this video, we saw that big rainstorm, and that's the real test of how all this drainage and final grading worked out. About a half hour after that video was taken, the storm took a short recess for about 20 minutes, and I got my camera out and took a look at it. 2022, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, biggest rainstorm we've had in
past 2 years.
And guess what? There wasn't even a single puddle on the lot. Everything had performed perfectly. And when I watched Greg grade this lot, and it was like watching a sculptor at work. He didn't use any measuring tools. He just used his eye and was able to grade this lot to perfection.
Before we graded it, this area was catching a lot of water. Now it's draining real well, thanks to these guys, thanks to GT equipment. We blew the gate off its hinges.
Here's what the yard looks like on a nice day. This photo was taken just a week before the rainstorm. Before the city would do its final inspection and issue the certificate of occupancy, there was just one last inspection before that, and that was the civil engineer inspecting the final grading. So the civil engineer came out, and this point I really want to get this thing closed, and my God, we were so close. So the civil engineer comes out, he's got a copy of the grading plan, and he's out here for 3 hours, and he's got perspiration running down his forehead, even though it was not a warm day at all. And he's, you can see the guy's stressed out, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? We're gonna have to tear the whole property out or something. That was a Friday, so I had to go through the weekend in pain. But on Monday, we got the certificate stating that the grading was fine, and we could go on and get the final inspection by the city. But what a testament to the job Greg Thornhill did to be able to grade a property that doesn't puddle and to satisfy an engineer who's out here going crazy for 3 hours. To watch Greg work, he was basically sculpting the lot. It was not just work for him. He was an artist at work. Well, I've got my cheat sheet here, and I've got a few items I want to go over with you in regard to you hiring a tractor guy. First, a couple of things would be, you want a guy who can do all the jobs. You don't want a guy to come out, well, this guy can do septic, but he won't do the foundation trench, or he won't do utility trenches. You want a guy who can do all those jobs. You don't want to be shifting between one guy and another. Also, hopefully he has all his own equipment. If he's got to go out and rent equipment, who knows what kind of delays that will cause. You want a guy who's always on time getting to the job. Greg Thornhill was up here before I was, and he was the most timely guy of all. He would be, if it was 6 o'clock, we were supposed to be at the site, I would come out here at 10 of 6, and he would be out here waiting for me. And he would always show up and be reliable. That's important. You want a guy who's got a license, of course. Greg was a licensed guy. You want a guy who's going to be on the job himself when he does it. The drywall contractor and the stucco contractor, they were people who, they came out and looked at the job, but they didn't lift any drywall or do any drywall patches or lift a stucco trowel or anything like that. They were just out here to supervise the job. Greg was out here, and he was the sole guy on the tractor except when there were 2 tractors running, and then he would have somebody else on the second tractor. But he was, there was no time Greg was out here and watching another guy doing the tractor work. He was always out here every minute of the job that GT equipment was working here. You got to want a guy who's upbeat and encouraging. This job of building a house by yourself, or not by yourself, but taking on all this responsibility is, especially for your first time, makes for a series of peaks and valleys, emotional peaks and valleys, where you can really get down when you don't know exactly how you're going to take care of an upcoming task that seems impossible. Greg was always there to encourage me and tell me, yeah, we can get it done, and especially with the tractor work, because I didn't know that much about it. And he always said, yeah, we'll get it done, don't worry about it. And then he'd go to work on it, and I'd look at it and say, well, that's not the way I do it. But then he'd be finished before I would know it and doing a great job on it. Lastly, you'll want to pay a fair price for all this work. As I mentioned earlier, there were 9 jobs out here for the tractor guy. Some of those were actually in 2 parts where Greg would dig a ditch and then he would come back days later and fill it up. I don't know how you'd do that, all that work with a single contract drawn before the project began. There are so many unforeseen circumstances out here for one, and I wouldn't want to do a succession of contracts, one after the other, for the work being done. The way we worked it here was the first 2 times I asked Greg, for instance, for the preliminary grading, how much is that going to be, Greg? And he gave me a figure, and I said, well, that's good, let's go for it, and I'll pay you afterward. After the second job, I learned to trust Greg, and I said, you know, Greg, just do the work and bill me afterward for whatever amount you feel is fair. And yeah, he billed me afterward and never seemed like it was quite enough, to be honest, especially in relation to what some of the other contractors were making, and they didn't have the equipment costs that he had. I just felt Greg's prices were more than fair. Well, I took all this video. I took video of everything during the construction process, except for the drywall, because it was just a dust bomb in here. But I had this video, and I wanted to show my appreciation for Greg, so that's why I'm doing this. He hasn't paid me a penny, he didn't ask for this video. This is just out of appreciation because he's such a good guy. I don't think you'll find another Greg out there, another Greg Thornhill, but at least this gives you some idea of the ideal situation and what you should strive for. So if you want to build that house, you probably won't find a Greg, but you'll get through it anyway, I'm pretty sure. And it's a series of emotional peaks and valleys. Some of those valleys are pretty deep when you didn't know how something was going to get accomplished. But now I have a beautiful house here, and I would suggest anybody who has a dream of building their own house to go ahead and do it, and with some tenacity and smarts, you'll get it done.